Now, some of you may be wondering why I focus so much on the 14th Amendment and the fact that I am not a 14th Amendment citizen. And I wanted to do a quick video to get in a little bit more information than I had when I did the earlier one, and kind of cover why it is quite impossible for me to be a United States citizen or a 14th Amendment citizen, and what I believe and what I honestly know to be true about the 14th Amendment. The first thing I want to bring up is the fact that when they passed the 14th Amendment, there were a couple things that happened. One is there were immediately court cases. And in all of those court cases, the courts went into some pretty good depth as to what the differences between a 14th Amendment citizen was and what the difference between them and a state citizen. So at the time of right after the Civil War, say just before the Civil War, a state citizen was any white person that was born in one of the several states, and they were treated equally between the several states, and everything was fine there. But the problem that they had is that the Constitution itself mentions, and there's a court case where they went into really good depth. I may try to find that and cover it because it actually has a lot of detail about this. And it was actually prior to the 14th Amendment getting passed. But they were looking into making an amendment to including blacks or the slaves into being citizens of the several states. And there were a couple of problems they had. One, the states wouldn't go along with it. And two, the federal government couldn't push it because the Constitution itself actually explicitly mentioned slaves, and they can't include, and it mentions we the people, and that because we the people at the time were all the white people and the slaves were the black people, they couldn't just say that all of a sudden they were going to add black people to the Constitution's inclusions into the Bill of Rights because they were specifically mentioned as being excluded. And so the idea to solve this problem was to come up with the 14th Amendment. And so there's other Supreme Court cases that are after the 14th Amendment that go into what these, what this means. What do state citizens, what are the rights that they have, and what are the rights of these 14th Amendment federal citizens? And it basically came down to this. The 14th Amendment citizens have all of the protections that are included in the statutes that are related to the 14th Amendment or that are specifically mentioned in the 14th Amendment. But state citizens don't get any of those rights. They get none of the protections from the 14th Amendment, and they only retain the rights that are, and actually it's not even fair to say this, but they get the rights protected in the first 8 amendments to the Bill of Rights. In reality, we have all the rights unless we have specifically given them up to the government for the ability to protect our rights. But we won't get into that. Just let's say that the Bill of Rights are, for the sake of this argument, they're our protections. And then the slaves actually gained privileges that were given to them by the federal government. Now, why are their notices privileges and ours are rights? That gets into the fact that we created the Constitution, and we recognized our God-given rights to freedom of speech and other things that were enumerated in the Bill of Rights. The slaves at that time were slaves. They didn't have any rights at all. And when they passed the 14th Amendment, the federal government is what is giving them this new citizenship. And therefore, it can't be a right. It can't be a core right because it was given to them by an entity, in this case, the federal government. And so those protections that they get, while, similar to the rights that we have, they're not actually rights, they're privileges. And so what that means is that the federal government passed a law that said these are the rights that these people get. Well, they could easily pass another law to say that they no longer have this particular right. So because they treat them as privileges, they can tax them, they can do all kinds of things to them, because again, An excise tax is a tax on a privilege. Well, being a 14th Amendment citizen is a privilege, and therefore the federal government could conceivably tax whatever they want to, as well as the states, on the privileges that they've given to this group of people. So having said that, I want to look at the 14th Amendment and see exactly what does it say. And so it says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Now, a couple things. When it mentions the term United States, we've already covered this in other videos. We don't know explicitly what they are saying when they say this. The claim is that it's talking about all 50 states, the continental United States. At the point that this was passed, I don't remember exactly how many states there were. There were not 50, but there's 13 or whatever it was. But it covered all of the continental United States that was recognized as part of the United States, or the States United. And so that territory doesn't actually have any jurisdiction. In other words, the jurisdiction in Georgia is Georgia's jurisdiction. Now, the federal government shares some jurisdiction with the state of Georgia in the sense that, if somebody declares bankruptcy or they commit a crime against a law that the federal government passed that is related to some power that we have given them through the enumerations, then they have limited jurisdiction to be able to, to come down and collect a citizen that may have violated some constitutional law that they passed. But to say that they have exclusive jurisdiction over the state of Georgia is absolutely not true at all. And there's plenty of Supreme Court cases that get into this. I'm not going to cover it in this video, but I can provide it if anybody wants to see it. Now, so when this says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States, the first question is, what are we talking about when it says the United States? But we get a little bit of a hint of it when it says, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, because the country doesn't have a jurisdiction. It's the individual entities in it, and it depends on what your activity is as to who actually has jurisdiction over that particular element. But to say that the United States of America has a single jurisdiction is just not true at all. So that's a little bit of a hint. And then it also is using the term persons, which, by the way, the Supreme Court case that I was referring to before the Civil War gets into the term persons and how we the people are the people that form the Constitution, and persons is more talking about slaves, but I'll leave that for their discussion. But the point is that this is really only getting into protecting the slaves. It's giving them citizenship because the several states wouldn't give it to them. So the federal government stepped up and allowed them to become citizens of the federal government, and then declared that the several states had to protect those rights that were given to them. Now, it gets a little bit more hinty here as to what it says when it says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So again, citizens of the United States is a federal jurisdiction, and this is actually referring to the states. No state shall infringe on those privileges or immunities that have been granted to these black slaves. So if you want to take the stance, as many Supreme Court judges, well, many judges in particular, and attorneys take, that the United States meant the entire country, then this particular thing doesn't make any sense at all. So why they would even bring up and mention the states in this particular declaration and then mention privileges and immunities when we're actually, we have rights, not privileges and immunities. So it's all a little bit strange to read if you're going to assume that the term United States is the United States of America and the several states. So that's just one point that I wanted to make here. Now, when they passed the 14th Amendment, they had to codify that into law to add exactly what it is this constitutional amendment is actually saying. What protection specifically are you giving these slaves? And so where we end up there is 42 USC 1981, which is your equal rights under the law. And it reads, all persons within the jurisdiction of the United States shall have those, and again, we don't know what they're talking about here until we actually get into that, shall have the same right in every state and territory to make and enforce contracts, to sue, be parties, given evidence, and to the full and equal benefit of all laws of and proceeding for the security of persons and property as enjoyed by the white people. Now, I want to let that sink in for a second, because this is codification of the 14th Amendment. Now, people want to claim that everybody is a 14th Amendment citizen, and I am claiming that that is absolutely impossible for a number of reasons that I'm not going to get into in this video, but that is absolutely impossible for us to be 14th Amendment citizens. But when they codified it into law, they actually used the white citizens, which are the ones that that form the Constitution in the states. They used them as a reference to specify what types of rights these are that they're going to enjoy. Now, if I get into 42 USC 1982, that is protection of property rights. And again, it reads, all citizens of the United States shall have the same right in every state and territory as enjoyed by white citizens. So if you want to, if an attorney or a judge wants to make the decision that the 14th Amendment covers all of us, then they need to go and explain why it is they explicitly reference the right that you're given, the thing that you're given the protection of, as being the same as the one that the white people have. Not white people in general, but white citizens. So if this covered white citizens, then it literally makes no sense. Like it's nonsensical. And another problem that you have with saying that you created the 14th Amendment itself to protect the rights of the white citizens is not only that you're using the white citizens as reference here, but that there's nothing that's been added to the Constitution or to this 14th Amendment or to any of these statutes that give us more benefits than we already have the right to. Like, in other words, it didn't give me the right to carry a gun. In fact, I would argue that 14th Amendment citizens do not have a right to carry a gun. It doesn't even list it in here. But it's still, it's quite strange the way that this is written if it was supposed to include white people when it did it. Like, why would it not just say every person in the United States of America gets this? But it doesn't do that because that is not what's actually meant when they wrote this. And so then you get over to civil action, deprivation of rights. Again, under every person who, under color of any statute. So notice this is not talking about rights. It's actually talking, and it says civil action for deprivation of rights is the title. But it says every person who, under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state or territory or District of Columbia, subjects or causes to be subjected any citizen of the United States or any other person within the jurisdiction thereof to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, and it goes on to say. So there's something weird going on here if we are to conclude that this is talking about every single citizen in the country and black, white, pink, or purple. This was written specifically for the 14th Amendment, and it seems to be honing in on this citizen of the United States and the protections that it has, which again, it calls privileges and immunities. It was here, wherever I was when it was talking about the privileges and immunities. Was it the Fort? No. Yeah. So no state is in the 14th itself. It calls them the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States. Well, a state citizen doesn't have privileges unless they exercise a privilege to do something that they don't otherwise need to do. A state citizen actually has rights. And so, when people go out and say that they have a right to drive, well, I guess, one, it depends on whether you're a 14th Amendment citizen or a state citizen, but a state citizen actually does have a right to drive, and none of the code sections that cover like OCGA, if you look up who's a citizen or who a person is that's covered underneath that code, it actually repeats the 14th Amendment. It doesn't actually include state citizens. And so one could sensibly argue that those code sections don't apply to a state citizen. So that's kind of where we're at with this whole 14th Amendment thing, and why every state and county and the federal government want you to believe that you actually are a 14th Amendment citizen when in fact you're not. And now I want to go one step further, and I want to look at what the USC defines as a federal area. And it says the term federal area means any lands or premises held or acquired for the use of the United States. Now remember, they want you to believe that the term United States is the whole country. Well, obviously this can't be talking about the whole country because there's no government over the whole country. I mean, well, there is the federal government, but they're specifically talking about the federal government here because it says for the use of the United States or any department, establishment, or agency of the United States. Well, how do you have an agency of the United States of America? That's just a landmass. The agency itself is actually part of the federal government. So you'd have a federal agency, but you don't have an agency of the United States of America because that's just a continental United States or the geographical area of the country. And so, and it goes on to say, or any part thereof which is located within the exterior boundaries of any state shall be deemed to be a federal area located within such state. So obviously we're not talking about states here, because if you wanted to define the term United States to be the entire country, well, then what in the world are you talking about states for? Because they're what makes up the whole country. And so how could you be located in a state when you're actually talking about this United States being the whole country? Like this would absolutely make no sense whatsoever if you were to interpret the United States as being the whole country. In closing, I want to point one more thing here. I want to go up here to the Bill of Rights, and let's look at the 10th Amendment. And it says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. So remember, you got enumerated powers that are given to the federal government, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So in other words, if there's no enumerated powers given to the state nor to the federal government, then the people retain those rights. And I'm only bringing this up for one purpose, and that is that when you read this, it is literally impossible to read the 10th Amendment and think that they're talking about the entire country when they mention when they use the term United States. It's clearly talking about the federal government. It's the only thing it could be talking about. Nothing else would make any sense. And again, it refers to the states in this thing. So it would make no sense to discuss what is the United States? The United States of America is all 50 states. Their land masses are all joined together, and you end up with the United States of America. And the District of Columbia is kind of sitting over here in a little bitty 10-mile square inside of one of the states. And then any military base, post office, or whatever other areas that the federal government owns, those are federal areas. And so just more proof that the term United States does not always mean the entire country. And the 14th Amendment absolutely cannot be talking about white people specifically, because it uses them as a reference to denote what rights they are giving to this other class of citizen called a United States citizen. And hopefully that's enough to get you to at least start thinking about this, because we are not 14th Amendment citizens, and we should stop saying that under the 14th Amendment or under the 14th Amendment we get the right to whatever. That's a bunch of BS. We have rights. We do not have privileges and immunities, which are defined in the 14th Amendment, and we, reject any privileges and immunities that you're claiming over us, because we never signed up for any of that. We are state citizens. We were protected by the original state constitutions, and this is all a bunch of mumbo jumbo since the 14th Amendment. It's also interesting that before the 14th Amendment, they always used the word citizen in all cap with a capital C. And after the 14th Amendment, they started referring to everybody as a lowercase c for citizen. So again, just some food for thought. Hopefully it'll get your brain thinking about things that you might not otherwise think about.